automobiles, more often referred to as cars, which is how I will be referring to them as in this speech. I will be going over 4 problems that I have identified with cars, starting with the first one, the noise. Cars are loud. They are very loud, and the noise that cars make, it's rather unfortunate. You know, depending on where you live and the building and all that stuff, you know, the noise from cars outside can be at varying levels of loudness, going up to very bothersome levels. And this is a really big pain. And also with just going outside and walking on the street, you know, cars, they are really loud, and you don't even need to be really close to them to hear them. Even far away in the distance, the noise from cars gets carried on by just open air, basically. Anyway, cars are really loud, and unfortunately, a lot of people seem to not take peace and quiet very seriously, but I think the loss of it is a very big deal. Only decades ago, cars wouldn't have been a thing. A person could just live in a house and enjoy some peace and quiet. One could go on the street and not have to listen to these loud machines going around. Yeah, and like, it's unfortunate that people do not value the peace and quiet and do not take the loss of it very seriously. Yeah, so let's get to the next problem, the safety, or more like the lack thereof. Pedestrian fatalities are often dismissed by many people. They are just seen as an unfortunate side effect, just a price to pay for the cars, and if they think about it at all. But pedestrians, they die, and one thinks, how come just walking on the street is deadly? Like, again, going back mere decades, one could go walking on the street and not have to worry about getting killed randomly for no reason. These days, if one doesn't pay attention enough, there is a high risk of people getting killed, yourself or others, depending on who you are you the driver of a car or a pedestrian? But anyway, everyone needs to be paying this attention. Everyone has to be in this high state of alert all the time. So this means that if there's someone who doesn't necessarily pay all that much attention, let's say a pedestrian, and then they get killed for no reason or seriously injured, still bad. So what does this mean? What? Are you gonna say that, like, well, it's their fault, some stupid idiot who doesn't know how to pay attention? But, like, how is that now a bad thing? Back in the day, which wouldn't have been that long ago, a person could walk on the street and mind their own business, just think about stuff, and be calm and have some peace of mind just walking there and not have to worry about being killed and all this other random nonsense with all the traffic laws, and it just doesn't make any sense. People have traded away peace and quiet and safety and just having some peace of mind also, like just it all just for the cars. And there's the rules, the traffic laws and all that stuff. Walking on the street. Now these might be minor inconveniences, but I will mention them still. Weird things like all the, like just things like traffic lights. Really, if you think about them, like what's the purpose they serve? What is the function of a traffic light? It is to protect people from the danger of cars. The very instrument of traffic light is there because cars are dangerous. It's there to try to prevent some of the dangers of cars. So the mere existence of traffic lights demonstrates the danger of cars. People have to take turns to walk across the fucking street. You can't just go and walk on the fucking street. You have to follow some weird traffic lights. But like here it's mostly the principle that like the cars. Why are the cars, these dangerous death machines, going around the street? Why are they given such high priority that they get to dictate the rules of fucking walking on the street? It is silly. Anyway, but the more important thing perhaps, well, actually I don't really know if it's less important. I think it is important still, actually. Yes. The rules and the traffic, it is all dictated by the cars, and that's unfortunate. And not only that, but also, actually yeah, I'm gonna expand on that. Cars, even more so, even further, they occupy the space too. Oh yes, that's also important. I'm gonna say that too. The space, the cars, they take out of space. Not only that, I would say they waste space. But here's the thing, if you have a road, or whatever, the space for the cars, the lanes, the cars take the lanes. Let's say there are a few lanes for the cars, let's say, I'll just pick a number, 4 lanes, 2 in both directions, okay? Then let's say there's some parking too, perhaps, okay? Well, that's like several meters of space for cars, and then, after that, there's a narrow sidewalk for people, and bicycles, depending on the street and where you live in the world and whatever the traffic laws and everything is. Yeah, there are a lot of variables. Anyway, but let's say that the pedestrians and the bicycles, they go on the same narrow sidewalk thing, for this example. So now you've given several meters in width to cars, and only a few for everyone else. So like, that's a waste of space. But like, it also just... Now there's a narrow sidewalk where if a person is riding a bicycle, they have to now go on the narrow sidewalk and avoid all the people walking, dodge them. And then right next to them there are loud death machines going at high speeds. And I find this ridiculous. There should be at least everywhere where car lanes exist, there should be bicycle lanes. Like, that's just a given, that should be the case, but it's not, because people are stupid. People are stupid and they think that bicycles exist. This sort of utter incompetence, it's just everywhere where any decisions are being made. Anyone, anywhere who holds any power and is in any position to make these decisions, like, there's such a rampant, widespread stupidity everywhere. It is unfortunate, really. Anyway, like, it just should be the case. It should be the default everywhere. Every fucking where there is a car lane, a single car lane, there should be a bicycle lane right next to it. Why not? It really doesn't make any sense. for there not to be? Why are cars given such a high priority? It is very unfortunate. But that's not necessarily really the safety anymore, but it doesn't really matter that the 4 things are not real that specific. That's just general, 4 problems with the cars in this speech. Anyway, regardless, I will now be getting to the next problem. The next problem with the cars. The pollution. And I'm not talking about some climate change stuff and all that stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about just the old school idea of just polluting the fucking environment. There is a harm to human health when there are all kinds of weird particles and whatever that comes out of the car's exhaust. And all that. And you are pumping out all kinds of weird exhaust into the air. That's pollution. Pollution. You're ruining the environment. People have to live somewhere. And if there are all kinds of cars riding around, they are polluting the environment. You are harming people. And since I'm concerned for the people's health, then it is a problem that cars exist and that cars are so prevalent. Why are cars everywhere? The cars, they pollute. That hurts people's health. Yeah, why do people tolerate all these negative aspects of cars? They are harming their health, and that is very unfortunate. Oh yes, and also, I will mention this. This is a historical thing, but actually it might still be a thing in some places in the world, but mainly in the West at least, and most of the world actually. I don't know exactly, but most of the world actually, I think. It doesn't apply to anymore, but this is a historical note. For a long time, the fuel of cars contained lead. Fucking lead. Of all the chemicals possible, it had to be fucking lead. That is really unfortunate. For a long time, cars were pumping out massive amounts of lead into the atmosphere. And hence the environment was polluted with lead. This is fucking lead. Come on. Why did it have to be lead? Anyway, fortunately enough, that was banned, at least in most of the world, as far as I'm aware. But even that wasn't too long ago. And it is so silly. And all this inherently is because of cars. It wouldn't have even been a problem if there was no cars, but cars brought this problem. Now, fortunately, the lead problem specifically was solved. There's no longer lead in the fuel, except for a few exceptions for some specific machinery for some specific purpose or whatever. But anyway, lead doesn't really exist in cars' fuels anymore, but it still, I believe, serves as an example of just the pollution and the harm to the environment and to human health that cars do. Because for a long time they did do that, and you can't just ignore it. It doesn't just go away in that sense. Cars, for a long time they did that. So even if it was now banned, recently, anyway, and also it's actually somewhat arbitrary to say recently, in what scale? Well, a few decades ago, 30 years ago, I think, were the latest ones who banned it in the world, most of the world for the most part. Anyway, but that's still pretty recent when we are talking about things like pollution and whatever. So anyway, for a long time, they did pollute the environment with not only all the other crap that fuel exhaust has, car exhaust has, not only other crap, there's lead. Anyway, a bunch of lead poisonings in the people. But this is to say that, like, this is because of cars. Because cars, people wanted cars and cars showed up. And then people got lead poisoning. Cars were the reason for this. And not just a mistake to use lead in the fuel. Lead used in the fuel was done because of cars. Because cars needed fuel. Because cars ride everywhere and they pump out the lead into the atmosphere. Cars are the problem. Anyway, that is something of a historical note, but I believe it is still important to point out. So, that is also a thing. The pollution. People, they unfortunately neglect the environment, and that is usually done often in many other areas also. Many other things, but I'm talking about cars here, so I'm not gonna talk about anything else. So, now let's get to the final fourth problem. Car infrastructure is horrendously expensive. It really is. It costs a lot of money and resources, and so it is expensive. It is expensive in the absolute meaning of the word. That is expensive. It costs so much to maintain car infrastructure. It costs so much. And then some of the most unfortunate things that are done with this, how it is paid for. Some of the more unfortunate things, and it's just so evil too, is that, well, it's the thing. Who pays for it? Well, it's taken from the taxes, of course. But not only taxes from the people who drive, also the people who don't drive cars have to pay taxes, and they go to car infrastructure. So, a person who doesn't drive cars, who, let's say, walks and rides a bicycle, they don't pay for cars, but they have to pay for the car's infrastructure. That is really unfortunate. But now you might say that, well, that's how society works. Like, taxes are taken from everyone and they are put to places that benefit the society. And even if you personally don't use something, then the money still goes to still benefit for the society. Let's say, like, a school is a good example of this. For example, even if you don't, let's say that you are some adult person, let's say in the 40s or whatever. Let's say you don't have children, but you still have to pay taxes, and the taxes go to schools so that children can go there to the schools and learn. Now you might say that, well, it is still perfectly reasonable to tax that adult man, let's say. It is reasonable to tax that because it is beneficial for the society. Because taxes are not about benefits to the individual, it's about benefits to the society. Okay, well, that is reasonable. And that is the basic premise of taxes. But then, if you pay attention, we are talking about, quote, a benefit to the society, unquote. So are cars really a benefit to the society? You have to make darn sure that you are actually making a benefit to the society. Because if you're going to be taxing people, not only people who drive cars, but the ones who don't even drive cars, if you're going to be taxing everyone and putting that to car infrastructure, you better make fucking sure that it actually is a benefit to the society. But here I am listing these 4 big problems with the cars. So then the final question is, are the cars and the function of a car the convenient mode of transit from point A to point B when it is convenient? Is it worth the loss of peace and quiet, safety, and the pollution? Is it worth having these big problems? Oh yes, and the 4th one, the expensiveness too. Oh yes, don't forget about the 4th. is it worth having this mode of transit from point A to point B arbitrarily, from arbitrary point A to arbitrary point B in a fashion like this? Is it worth having this when considering the 4 big problems? And I do say that they are really big problems. It is not insignificant. Peace and quiet. I take peace and quiet very seriously. The loss of it is a big problem, and it is very unfortunate. Just having the peace and quiet, to just be able to be without being disturbed with all the loud noise, I think that is very serious. And then the safety, the people's safety. There is all the danger and all the other nonsense that goes with it. The pollution, people's health is compromised. And also there are other indirect ways to compromise the health too. If you're just talking about health, just driving in cars, sitting in the car instead of actually walking or riding on a bicycle. One could argue that even that has a detriment on health, but that's not necessarily pollution, but it is still, well, it is still health, whatever. And then the expensiveness. It is a lot of money that it is put into car infrastructure. It really is a lot, and I don't think people appreciate this. Just how much actually it costs to resurface roads and to rebuild all the bridges and just everything to do with all the car infrastructure. And that's on top, and that's only the car infrastructure. The cars themselves are expensive also. Just that the automobile itself is also expensive. It costs money to maintain and to own, and it's just, and the fuel is also expensive. Yes, the fuel itself is also really expensive. So yeah, it's not just the infrastructure either. Cars themselves are expensive and the fuel. Meanwhile, one can hop on a bicycle and ride. And arguably there's a benefit to that, because like health improves from riding a bicycle. Sure, there's the cost in you having to eat food to be able to live and to move around. But you're gonna have to eat either way, and yeah, like bicycles are really efficient. It's basically like the most efficient way to travel, to get around. And unless you are specifically going very long distances for some reason, which most people for the most time don't do, then there's no need for such a vehicle that can take you hundreds and hundreds of kilometers. There's no need for a vehicle like that. People could drive bicycles. Most people, most of the time. So, the cars are really expensive. With that all, are the cars then worth it? Are they worth all the bad problems they cause? I say no. People were incredibly short-sighted. When cars showed up, people saw them and liked them to the point that now they are everywhere. It is unfortunate. And while there may be some use case for some cars, there may be perhaps still a reason to have some car infrastructure for some uses. There may be some uses. For the most part, those would be only a few things. But in general, if we talk about, let's say, private vehicles for, let's say, commuting, whatever, work and such things, and going to a shop to buy food and whatever, things like that for a private person to do their private life as a mode of commuting and all that stuff. For the most part, that, in my opinion, could be eradicated. Just get rid of it. A few disabled people could get exceptions, and they could use vehicles, and it's perfectly reasonable to have a few cars, because I'm not stupid. I can recognize the fact that there is a function that cars can serve. There can be some car infrastructure and some cars for some use cases. But it is really unfortunate just how much they are used. And the extreme dependence on them, it is so silly. And I say it needs to end. It is not worth the loss of peace and quiet, the loss of safety, and all the random precautions that come with that, and the pollution and all the money it costs. It is not worth it to have the car that is not even fundamentally necessary. Because as I just mentioned, the bicycle, most people, most of the time, they don't drive hundreds and hundreds of kilometers. Or rather, here's the thing, actually, it is really the function of an arbitrary point A to arbitrary point B that cars do. They can go from any place to any other place, basically, so long as there is the infrastructure for it. For just long distances, trains are, of course, the superior form of transit. Trains, they are inherently better in every way for getting around in long distances. So if you ever need to travel long distances, use a train. That is the best way to do things. Yeah, but unfortunately, many countries, nation states, whatever, are tearing up railways and just building more and more car infrastructure, and that's really bad. That's just so... oof, that's bad. Anyway, but anyway, the trains are superior. They are the way to go when going long distances. And then arbitrary point-to-point mode of transit for local trips, which are most of the things for most of the people most of the time. They could be well done on a bicycle. A few disabled people and such could use some vehicles. Really, cars only exist for the few things where you need to go from a very arbitrary place to another very arbitrary place, and it is a decent length of distance away from you, where no train necessarily goes, and it's not necessarily any close to any railway station or something like that, and no other public transit takes you there. Cars are only ever useful for something like that. But even so, a car infrastructure needs to go there. And that still costs money to maintain that car infrastructure that goes there. Even if there is no train or other thing like... well, actually, public transit could just use those same roads. Anyway, cars do have some functions. They could be used for some purposes. But it is not as necessary. And that's not what I'm trying to say here anyway. My point isn't that cars are entirely useless. I never said that, and that was never my point. My point was from the start and still is, for the most part, most people, most of the time, most trips, they don't need cars. Cars are inherently just... there are too many of them. Too much. Too much is too much. Enough is enough. I've had it. No more of this nonsense. Cars need to be reduced like 90% at least. Just the volume of cars. It has to be taken down. A total eradication of cars entirely is not necessary, and that's not what I advocate for here. But it could be taken like 90% down, at least. Yes. So, that's it for this speech. Thanks for listening. Until next time, bye.